like,
Just
Danny, you're
never know.
crazy, or I mean,
You're
okay,
definitely not crazy.
we
That
see
was
it
nuts.
ultimately. We do see it ultimately go Magnus Carlsen's way. He wins. He wins that game. Has a 2-game lead to start the first half here of our 5-1 portion. And I'm got to catch my breath. John, you take it away.
Oh my god, that I'm still processing what just happened there. Magnus with the unsound exchange sack. Gukesh refuted it perfectly, Danny. And I thought he was going to win when the queens were about to get traded. I think his mistake there was to trade queens in the wrong version. He let Magnus's bishops get too active. And I think the main concrete mistake was, remember when he recaptured the queen with his D pawn? That let the light squared bishop get active. And that was the reason Magnus didn't have enough comp in the first place, is because his light squared bishop was bad. Once it got active, things got very difficult from a practical standpoint. A heartbreaker for the Indian prodigy there.
Completely agree. Magnus is eating a banana. Does that mean it's banana time for all of us?
I have a banana,
Magnus put
unfortunately.
more than half a banana in his mouth right there. That was that, that was I mean, banana time for all of it. We're all doing it.
Oh my god, you just like unfurled, you just uncorked a random banana that you just had next to you.
I always have bananas
Only
around
Danny
in case
Wrench.
Magnus says it's snack time. If Magnus eats a banana, everyone eats a banana. Hey, everybody at home, go get yourselves a banana. Good potassium, great for you. Thank you,
What if
Magnus, for
Magnus
that
pulls
cue.
out a dragon fruit? Do you have that nearby too?
You don't know what I have in the studio. Let's just say it's a bag of tricks. Not more than Beth Harmon wigs hanging around here. All right,
Oof.
so we have another Berlin, a different move order than what we saw in game 2. Or it was game 3. No, yes, it was game 3. The second time
Yeah.
Magnus had white. If you're just tuning in, Magnus started the match with d4, switched to a Berlin in game 3, and now in game 5, we see another Berlin for the world champion. I like to keep track of the storyline of what the openings are. Kind of tells us maybe sometimes what we're going to see, Danya, as the time controls get faster. We said Magnus would try different things. He would poke around. We've seen d4 and e4 played.
Yeah, and I actually think this is a huge game because in the blink of an eye, it's now a 2-point lead. That was a 2-point swing right there. Gukesh wins the game. It's still a tied match. I mean, a draw here would go a very long way towards stabilizing things going into the halftime break of the 5-minute portion. A loss
Yep.
and the train, the Magnus train will start to leave the station.
Talk about how hard that is as a player. You played chess at a pretty high level in your career, Don. I don't know if you knew that. You're pretty good at chess. How hard is it?
Eh.
It always sounds easier said than done to say stop the bleeding, right? That's the phrase
Mm-hmm.
we were both given by our Soviet trainers. You don't want to lose more than a couple games in a row, but psychologically, you want to win when you're down 2 games. So how hard is that to gather yourselves, make the disciplined decision, which is you're black and you need a draw despite being down 2 games, just focus on what's in front of you.
It's super hard. And again, I want to be more sparing in my sports references, but I really think this is a good analogy. You see basketball teams when they get down, the less disciplined teams just start jacking up really bad shots. They start shooting 3-pointers, and they don't run their plays because they're trying to do everything at once. And it's so easy to try to do the same thing in chess. The
Yep.
other problem, Danny, is in a Swiss tournament, when you lose a game, you normally get an easier opponent. The hardest tournaments to come back from are matches and tournaments like the US Championship, where you lose a game against Onishok and you get Hikaru Nakamura in the last round.
Right.
Here, you lose a game against Magnus Carlsen, and in the next round, you get Magnus Carlsen. And after that, you
Yep.
get Magnus Carlsen again.
Hey,
So
who do you get
that's
after that?
I don't know. It's
Maybe
like
Magnus
those.
Carlsen. No,
That might be the
you're
case. Yeah.
you're right. It's the definition of out of the frying pan into the fire, right? Playing a
Yeah.
match against someone like Magnus Carlsen. And so, you know, it is something that I think chess players, it's one of the last muscles chess players really develop, which is that kind of emotional discipline, putting the prophylaxis, kind of the smart, unbiased decisions ahead of what you want to do as a human. But you're right. I think Gukesh getting a draw here, heading into the halftime break, as we call it, for the first 90 minutes of the 5-minute portion, probably the smartest thing he can do. Doesn't want to go down 3 games,
But he's
and
in trouble again.
but he's in trouble. Yep.
He's just flat out. And I mean, look at this position. The knight is pinned. If you have to take on d2, White's bishop is so strong in the open board. Bishop c3, bishop takes g7 as a threat.
Yep.
Ugh,
Yep.
this is nasty.
Yeah, the knight can't move because the queen on d7 is hanging. For those wondering what the pin is there, and And that's a problem because bishop c3 is coming. Also, h4, h5 is on the agenda, where you start to
Yeah.
see white mounting pressure from both the king side pieces and the queen side pieces. Is when you have a problem, and that's, there's more than meets the eye in a symmetrical pawn structure. We kept talking about why Gukesh was playing for a draw. Maybe we were taking for granted that that's because he was playing in Berlin, and that is a position where usually black has decent holding chances. But this is not the kind of Berlin you want. White has all the pressure.
And Gukesh has a minute 20. I don't know how he's meeting bishop c3. Magnus holding that move in reserve. Instead, he's lifting the rook up to f4. And of course, if you have to play the move g6, and I think Gukesh will, that means you create this massive gash on the king side that white can occupy with his queen. But look at Magnus
Wow.
just goes for the e-file. Very positional approach here.
I love that. What a switch right there. It's the only open file on the board, which means
Mhm.
whoever dominates it will get access to all the other things that matter. This is such an interesting switch from Magnus, giving up the pin, because rook e4 was also possible, and there was no rook e8 for black. White could
Yep.
trade and win the knight. But I really like his awareness that the e-file is now the most important thing to control, and that's what Carlsen goes for.
And I would contemplate going back to g4 now that there's a massive outpost on e6 for the rook. So queen g4 and rook e6 looks
Yeah.
really pretty. Gukesh, of course, wants king f7 and rook e8. And if he can get those two moves in, that's the danger of hanging your hat on an open file. If that file is taken away from you, your advantage kind of evaporates. And the bishop ain't too happy all
Yep.
of a sudden. It's kind of staring at a bunch of black's pawns. So far, Gukesh
But
defending pretty well. H3.
it's funny. I was going to ask whether g4 was possible there for Magnus, because the knight
Mhm.
didn't have any other squares besides h6. You could trade, shake and bake, and mom helped with queen e7, right? I mean, there was an idea there where okay, he doesn't go for it, but whenever there's only one open file, I always told my students for years that open files are like commodities, and that supply and demand are the principle that govern them. And so if there's
Totally.
only one, it's more valuable. So that e file that Magnus is controlling is going to be the way for him to either, and he goes g4. So I was, again, now there is queen e7 at some point.
Yeah.
There's also bishop
Takes.
h6.
So rook e8 is kind of a semi-threat right now. It's not a real threat as long as the rook is protected by the bishop. Maybe bishop c3 is a good compromise move. Magnus shifts his queen to d4. That's such a nasty move to face, Danny, because now you can't play
Yep.
rook e8 because the pawn hangs. And you could play f5 here, but I would never open up the long diagonal for white's bishop. So Gukesh just kind of has to hang tight here and try to find the right opportunity to go rook e8, which he's trying to do on the next move. Maybe rook e3 and rook f3 to keep the rooks on the board is what the doctor ordered here for Magnus.
Yeah, and I'm still not sure he shouldn't have played queen e7. I mean, I'm not just doubling down on my commodities reference of supply and demand. I don't know that white's advantage is any bigger here than it was earlier, but still hard to see how that knight improves. And that pawn on g4, we always say a knight 3 squares away from a pawn is dominated. We, meaning
Whoa.
Robert Hess, the royal we. So we see those
Yeah, the
pawns,
royal
those
we.
pawns dominating that knight on g7 make it really hard for black.
I'm actually low-key surprised Magnus didn't try to keep the rooks on the board. Now, I think Gukesh, his position is still very nasty. Magnus still has long-term ideas on both sides, but
Yeah.
at least black can play quickly. And black can rattle off a bunch of these moves, queen e7, king f7, and the margin of victory has narrowed considerably. I think Magnus's idea, Danny, is maybe to go c4 and b4 and a5, and ultimately to target the c7 pawn, actually. Let's see.
Yeah, I agree. Although I was just sitting here mentally thinking about the fact that I also agreed with you that Magnus trading rooks didn't really feel like a way to improve the advantage, and the open file is no longer a storyline in the position. Black's queen owns it. So I like Gukesh's chances. If we had to say this position versus what it was 10 moves ago, Black has a much better chance to draw, I think, from here.
But I would still choose Magnus here. There's another idea, which is to play
Hmm.
c3 and b4. Pretty common in
Okay.
these ideas. Posing an ultimatum. Either you trade and allow the outside passer, not an option. The knight is terrible at stopping corner pawns. Or you allow white to take on a5 and create a long-term weakness that's on a dark square. Gukesh defending very well, though. h5, trying to create weaknesses that he can attack on Magnus's king side to deflect his attention from the queen side.
I like it a lot. And Magnus has to be careful. If you misstep,
Oh, yeah.
you bring the king up, is Black striking with things like f5, you create, and the knight starts to get into those squares. So
Yep.
I'm white is still in the driver's seat, but if Gukesh opens up the king side, it would even be worth, let's say, an imaginary pawn, because if he can get a draw, get a perpetual check against the white king over there that doesn't have defense, this is what Gukesh needs, and the time pressure is starting to become real here.
Yeah, Magnus trying to be as flexible as possible. He brings the king up to defend g4. I'm just worried that Magnus is going to find some way to complicate the game, and Gukesh with 17 seconds for the rest of the game. Again, we've seen Magnus win so many of these games in so many different ways. I think f5 and queen e6 check in response to knight g7 is very strong.
He goes queen e1. That's interesting. He's flipping the script to the king side, threatens queen h4.
Oh, but that was such a beautiful tactic. I think you take it. I'm pretty sure you trade, and then you go g5 to restrict black's knight completely.
I think your move f5 was better than Magnus's queen e1. I agree. But if you take and play g5, I love where that bishop on c3 starts to flex on the knight. We always say bishops are better than knights when you have pawns on both sides of the board. We see the bishop dominant if you can open up that a1, h8 diagonal.
Okay, so Magnus keeps the queens on the board, but now he's got problems with this d5 pawn. And if you have to go king e4, Danny, what you mentioned earlier, f5 check, maybe. I mean, it opens up the bishop. No, now he gives up d5 with check.
Wait, now he's losing. What is going on here?
He just gave up the most important pawn with check.
He's running the king to the queen side.
Oh, and it's still not over. It's still a 3-result game.
Just don't take g5 because queen h8 is a mating problem.
Now he's pinned himself.
But here comes c5 and d4.
Yeah, but the bishop slips in through the cracks, and c7 is now a huge. Oh no, Magnus infiltrated.
Gosh.
I think Magnus is winning this one.
Queen's infiltrated. Here comes queen h7. No, he switched to the queen side instead.
Oh, don't get checkmated on g7.
Just shuffle your king. Don't mate yourself, Gukesh.
He goes for a queen trade, but he's going to lose a bunch of his pawns on the queen side. He's going to lose.
But king f5, and the bishop is blocked. The g-pawn's running. Who's faster?
But the a-pawn is so much faster.
The a-pawn is faster. The eval bar is evil.
That's it.
And says,
a6.
I'll answer your question, Danny. The a-pawn is faster, sir.
I wonder which pawn is faster here.
Oh my gosh. And with that, Magnus Carlsen, as the infamous meme and video reminds us, too weak, too slow is how most of his opponents have felt throughout his career. And in the